You're listening to the winning literary show, Off The Shelf Books Talk Radio, live with host Denise Turney, author of the books Long Walk Up, Portia, Love Pour Over Me, Spiral, Love Has Many Faces, and Rosetta's Great Hope. Turn up your dial and get ready for a blast of feature author interviews, 411 on book festivals, writing conferences, and so much more. Ready? Let's go.
So he kind of walked me through it, and ever since have been doing Off the Shelf. And for those of you who have been with us since the beginning, truly, truly thank you. And I know you've been blessed with the many guests we've had on. New York Times best-selling authors, Essence best-selling authors, authors from all over the world, people who own businesses, who've written books, have been on Off the Shelf. And we have another awesome author on deck for you today. But as I've been doing for about the last 2 years, I want to start with a quote, a thought, just something for you to chew on this Saturday. And this quote is from Michael Jordan. You must expect great things of yourself before you can do them. You must expect great things of yourself before you can do them. And again, I want to welcome you to our Saturday, May the 17th show here. And before we introduce you to today's guest, I just want to ask you, how good of a mystery sleuth are you? I love mysteries. I watched a mystery last night before I went to bed. I love a mystery. I always want to figure out who did it and why. Why did they do it? What was the motive behind what they did, and see how it gets unraveled, and people discover what really truly happened. If you value mystery and you also value relationships, because there's an awesome soulmate relationship in this story, and a complicated father-son relationship, and something I rarely see. But there's these 5 guys, they meet in college in Pennsylvania. One goes on to play in the NFL. One's on his way to the Olympics. He's a middle distance runner. They're all going to do very well. They are friends for life, these 5 guys meet in college. But one of them is involved in a murder. So that's the mystery there. If you love mystery and relationships are very important to you, I would encourage you to get a copy of Love Pour Over Me. It's an ebook, audiobook, paperback. Just Love Pour Over Me by Denise Turney. And let me know how you enjoy Love Pour Over Me. And now let us go and meet our very special off-the-shelf guest. And this morning's guest is Gerald Everett Jones. Gerald is a member of the Dramatists Guild and Women's National Book Association. He is also a board member of the Independent Writers of Southern California and a Film Independent Fellow. Very creative. Gerald holds a Bachelor of Arts with honors from the College of Letters, Wesleyan University. In addition to being a book author, Gerald is also a book reviewer, radio host, and screenwriter. His book reviews have appeared on KRLA-AM in Los Angeles and have been syndicated by Splash magazines worldwide. Gerald is also the author of several books, including the Evan Wycliff book series, How I Lie with Charts, Harambee's Kenyan Sundowner, Clifford's Spiral and Searching for Jonah, Clues in Hebrew and Assyrian History, a book that he co-wrote with Don Jones. Please check Gerald out online at GeraldEverettJones.com, and it's spelled GeraldEverettJones.com. And one more time, GeraldEv, B as in Barry, ErettJones.com. We are just honored and pleased to have Gerald Jones join us on Off the Shelf this morning. Welcome to Off the Shelf, Gerald.
Denise, thank you for that kind introduction. It's a delight to be with you on this Saturday.
And it's a pleasure to have you here with us. I always learn something from every guest who comes on Off the Shelf. Even after all these years, every guest says something that gives me like a aha moment. So for our listeners here, Gerald, to kick it off this morning, would you please tell Off the Shelf listeners where you grew up and what life was like for you growing up?
Well, I was a post World War II baby. My dad had just gotten out of the Navy. He had been in the Pacific on an LST, which was fondly remembered as a large, slow target. They carried troops and tanks to the Pacific Theater. And my mother was, at the time, she was learning stenography and she thought she was going to have a career with the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, but then she got, shall we say, sidetracked. So, yeah, I've been on the earth a while. And when I had my podcast radio show, getpublishradio.com, when I had that show, which is somewhat on hiatus now, I have a new one, Thinking About Thinking. That's another story. But the host would often introduce me. Here's our host, Gerald Everett Jones, the author who has the answers because he's already made all the mistakes himself. And that's certainly been true. I have been involved in what might be called self-publishing and is now indie publishing since the very early days of print on demand, even before Ingram and Amazon were doing that. And then also in the early days of ebooks. And up until that time, which was probably, 20 years ago, something like that, my career had been a professional writer. And I had written business and technical books. And I had an agent, and I wrote for mainstream publishers, and I worked for kind editors and not so kind editors. I understood the process. I turned to writing fiction about 15 years ago, and my agent said, "Well, have a nice life, kid."
Okay.
So this is how I learned to have my own imprint, LaPorta Books and Media. But to address your key question, which had to do with where I grew up, I was born in Kansas City, the Paris of the Midwest. And I grew up in Independence, Harry Truman's hometown. And then, because my dad was in the petroleum business, in the engineering end of things, chemical engineer, we got transferred all over the place to various offices and refineries throughout the U.S. So I lived in Baltimore, I lived in Connecticut, went to school in Connecticut, moved back to Chicago, then got married, moved to Detroit, ended up here in L.A. on the left coast. I'm in Santa Monica, just 6 blocks from the Pacific Ocean. But I will say, perhaps fodder for conversation, I had, right before COVID, I returned with my wife from Kenya. We lived for 2 years in Kenya, just next to the other ocean, the Indian Ocean. And that was an amazing experience. And I say we moved back from Kenya because life got interesting there. And what do you know? Things got so much more interesting here. So
Wow.
that is the state. I look at life with Kenyan eyes now.
Oh my gosh.
And if I would hike to buy my vegetables every morning at the market. And one of the first things Kenyans would share, and they're just letting off steam. It was almost like a motto, it's like, "Oh, corruption's the mother of Kenya." Okay, so it's all out in the open. If the cop stops you, you better have some cash. I mean, if you need a document, yes, it has a rubber stamp and there's a fee for the stamp, but there's also this, something goes in the pocket of the fellow who
Yes.
owns the stamp. So it's out in the open. It's just all there. And yet, you come here and then our media experience and our social media experience and our interaction with each other, it's just so much more layered in terms of communication. And yeah, I mean, it's like when people refer to the post-news era or the post-truth era, wow, it's bewildering. I will say, I
Mm.
didn't really mean to get off on that, but
No, 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 no. Yes, yes. Oh,
that's where I
I
came from.
yeah, I would love to live abroad for a while. People say it just changes you just to not just to visit, but to actually live. Uh, I know I lived in Hawaii for a while, which that was I just recommend it. I really do. Now, as a
Oh,
kid, what did you dream of being? What did you want to be when you grew up? When you were a kid?
mm, that is a significant part of my story because my dad being a chemical engineer, very much a scientific mind, and the interesting or complex part of it is that also he was an extremely devout Southern Baptist, Southern um, Sunday school teacher, deacon of the church, from a very devout family. My mother's from a Christian family, but she didn't wear it on her sleeve as much. But Dad would often have these debates with the people in the church about, did God create the earth in 7 or the world in 7 days? And so he would say, well, could it possibly be 7 eras? I mean, can you go that far? So, I mean, he had a scientific mindset, but then he also had, this very solid faith. And he wanted me to be a research scientist. And I was very bright in school. I got top grades. I wasn't a grind, if you will. In some ways, school wasn't quite enough, let's say. But as I got into my early teens, it seemed to me like writers got more girls.
Really? Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
it just like there was this whole world of literature, and it's like it was outside this Christian separatist walk, if you will. It permitted some dancing and going to movies. I had a one of the old relatives that was on. Actually, I think he was on my dad's side. His first name was Israel, and we visited him on his farm. And they warned me. They said, "Well, Uncle Israel has a rule: you never drink anything out of a bottle." And I said, "What? What? Soda pop? No, 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 no. Because if you get in the habit of tipping up the bottle, then you'll be a drunkard for the rest of your life." So that's how conservative it was.
Wow.
And in high school, I kind of broke away, and I was a bit of an ugly duckling for a while, if you will. But then we moved to Baltimore, which was interesting because it was DC adjacent, that whole government thing. And I broke out of my shell. I became president of the senior class. I was
Hmm.
popular. I dated. I was, and then I went to this little Ivy college, Wesleyan University, which is just a wonderful think tank, if you will. Would probably be considered, you know, progressive in today's world. But I studied with some famous authors. I studied with Jerzy Kaczynski, the guy who
Oh.
wrote Painted Bird and Being There. And it was among my. But then I also studied acting, and that was where my father was really furious with me. I didn't raise my son to be a Q word, and we really had a tussle over that. And I thought I was going to go, and I did think that I was going to go into acting professionally. I auditioned at Juilliard. I actually auditioned for John Houseman, of all people,
Hmm.
who said, "What makes you think you'll be an actor?" It's not the most pleasant experience. And I took that question seriously. Uh, and I answered it for about 10 minutes. I could see eyes rolling, but needless to say, I didn't get in. But so I get back to Chicago where my parents were living at the time. See that they had relocated again. And it was pretty clear that, and I'd had a bout of tuberculosis of all things. And
Oh.
my draft number was 6. This was Vietnam era. And I reported to the draft board, And they said, "Oh, you didn't have TV." I had a letter, but I mean, I didn't know whether I was going or not. And then, you get to the last station at the draft board, and here's the only fellow with a uniform in the place, and he's got your file folder in front of him, and there's two lines at the desk. One's a yellow line and one's a white line. So the yellow line leads out of the building, and the white line leads to the cafeteria. And after you have a meal, you're going on the bus to basic training. And so he didn't even look at me, just yellow line. So I didn't go to Vietnam. Many of my friends did.
Well,
so.
good for you. Good for you.
Well, I mean, then I had my other war, which was going door to door asking for a job in advertising copywriting, because I thought, okay, well, if I can't be an actor, maybe at least I can, work in film. And so my very first job was at an industrial film studio in Chicago, and I wrote ads for Meadow Gold yogurt. I wrote books for railroad coal trains, printing press equipment. It was quite an education. So.
Yeah, and I bet you some of those marketing writing might benefit you today. Before we talk about your novels, I wanted to ask you who or what inspired your love for writing fiction?
Well, I think one of my closest friends in the professional world was an industrial film director that I had met in my rounds when I was going door to door asking for a job. And this fellow he just was a colleague. He just was a very fluid mind. And storytelling was really at the heart of, we'd have lunch or dinner, and I would just listen to him speak, and he just like his fluid mind would just hop from subject to subject, and it was like I never had the urge to say, "Please get to the point." I just wanted to know where this was going, and I will, and I've often confessed this on the air, is that when I wrote business and technical books, which is I got involved in computer graphics as a producer, and that's how I learned computers, and that's how I learned to write books about computers and IT and stuff. Anyhow, when I wrote those books, and I had an editor and a publisher, I had to submit an outline first, an outline and a sample chapter. And I had to stick to that outline. I had to write 2 chapters a week. And if I didn't stick to the outline or write 2 chapters a week, I got my hand slapped by the guy. And it was a guy. It was always a guy back then. And so the discipline of writing to an outline, of as my editor said, getting my butt in a chair every day, that was normal for me. But as I got into fiction now, cranking forward many years, now I had always written spec screenplays. Those flew around LA like planes over the airport that were not permitted to land. So I got a couple of awards, but no movies. What I learned to do, or what I came to do when I was writing fiction, was I began to delight from writing from a blank page. I had no outline. And especially in my Preacher Evan Wycliff mystery series, I got 4 books in that series now. I'm kind of writing the 5th one. He's an amateur sleuth. He's like an agnostic minister. Let's say he's troubled. Agnostic's wrong, because, he's not saying there's no God. He's just saying, where are you? But people come to him with problems in the small Missouri town, again, going back to my roots, small Missouri farm town. People come to him with problems nobody else wants to solve. I mean, he's a counselor. He's somebody you can bring your troubles to. So here's this cold case, this crime, this troubled thing, and somebody needs to work through this ball of snakes, whatever it is. And one of the things that I discovered about my writing process is, if I write from a blank page, I don't know where it's going. And if I can surprise myself if I can pick the choice that seems unlikely or that might not make sense, but then I have to try to make it fit, I'll delight myself when it finally does, and presumably I'll delight the reader as well. And what informs it, going back to what I was saying about being an actor, yes, you could say I failed as an actor. I mean, I was on the stage a bit, on and off, in and out of college. But learning to play all of those roles, learning that I could be the bad guy as much as the hero. I mean, it's much more interesting to play a villain than it is to play a hero most of the time. And the example I often use is Joaquin Phoenix. Okay, Joaquin Phoenix is a vegan, an animal activist. I've never met him, but I've heard that he's just simply a really mild-mannered, relatively introverted person to meet. Well, look at the Joker. This crazy, mad serial killer. Well, Joaquin found that person in himself. He had to go deep within and say, what part of my psyche would do that? And really believe in it, really, really be motivated by it. And that one of the things that I often think is that, actors, as much as anybody, maybe more than anybody, understand that anybody's capable of anything. And so in history, when we judge people who, conducted war crimes or turned their friends in or, did these horrible things, it's like, oh, I'd never do that, or I'm a good person, or I'm moral, I'm righteous, whatever. Think again. And so that's part of what informs it, because when I was an actor, I realized, when you kind of have to wait for those parts to come to you. If you really long to play a character who, does whatever, I want to play a research scientist. Okay, I never was one, but I want to be a brilliant mathematician in a movie. You've got to wait for that script to come along, or you finally have to happen on a role quite by chance that you think fits one aspect of your personality. Well, if you're a writer, you get to play all the roles. You have to play all the roles. And so another mantra, another lesson about writing from a blank page is that you put those characters on a stage, you clothe them, you give them some traits and some motivations, and then they just go where they want to go. Because these are aspects of it's like what they tell you about dreams. If you dream about somebody, that's really an aspect of you, and that will often be a revelation. And you say, "No, I'd never do that." So yes, that's how I surprise myself, and hopefully, and those books have won awards. So somebody else must think so.
Yes, introduce us to Evan Wycliff. You talked a little bit about him, but can you tell us what his personality is like, and what's his family like, and what drives Evan?
Well, you've had something of a memoir from me, and that really is Evan is not, the apple hasn't fallen very far from the tree. I have him. I had relatives from Farmtown in Missouri, if you're a local, and my maternal grandfather would often take us, me and my brothers, to the farm on the weekends, so my parents could breathe and relax, and fishing, hunting, petting the sheep, riding the horse, all those things. We were city boys, but it was really a fascinating childhood from that standpoint. And I have Evan growing up as a farm boy in Appleton City, which is where some of my relatives are from, in southeastern Missouri, and he's being raised in a devout family, and he thinks he's going to go into the ministry. He believes he's been called, and so he goes to Harvard Divinity School, and which is something of a ecumenical. Well, they say Unitarian, but I mean it's a very broad-based seminary, and he learns enough of Christian history to realize that the church has sponsored wars, and it's had inquisitions and tortured people, and it's like what am I getting into here? And you read some of the travails of the Catholic Church today and liberation theology in South America, which the current Pope is very much familiar with, and you realize, well, this is strife and strife and strife. So he actually drops out of Harvard Divinity, and so well, maybe astronomy, astrophysics, maybe science will hold some answers for me, provide some comfort for me. And so he goes to MIT in astrophysics, and along the way, he meets up with a really brilliant woman who happens to have a Jewish background, and she's an engineer. Mm-hmm. And she goes to work while he's pursuing astrophysics in graduate school. She goes to work for an aerospace company, gets posted over to the Middle East, and lo and behold, they've gotten engaged before she left, and she's I'll be back, and she's killed in a missile attack in Lebanon. So here he is, heartbroken. He realizes science is like, okay, there's all these theories, but it's not. There's nothing hard and fast here. Yeah, okay, we can build an atom bomb, but we can't necessarily explain exactly how the universe produced this. And so he moves back to southern Missouri. He doesn't have a job, so. And his mother's passed away since then. That's been difficult. His father needs caregiving. But the one thing there's two things he finds to do. Number one, he can be a guest preacher. So he sometimes is preaching at the local Baptist church. And the other thing that he's found to do that makes a little more money is he's a data driller. He's certainly learned computers and laptops and phones and stuff. And so he works for the local Ford dealer as a skip tracer. He runs down, he's trying to find people who've skipped on their loans.
Okay.
And so he's pretty good at that. And he really doesn't have to burn a lot of shoe leather because he can do most of it from a computer screen, which amazes the dealer. So here he is, and this is the world he's thrown into. And in the very first book in this series, he hasn't been there very long doing these things and trying to get by. And his childhood friend, he's on his way to actually join up with a group of hunters. He's not much of a hunter. He's really not really too happy about that anymore, but he feels as though they've asked him along, and so he might make a good conversation companion, and he kind of misses them. So he's traipsing through a cornfield on the way to where he's going to meet these hunters in the woods, and he runs across the body of his best friend, his childhood best friend.
Wow.
And the guy's got a hole in his chest, and it looks like he's done himself in. And Evan thinks to himself, and it's like what you say, how did it happen? Why did it happen? Evan's thinking to himself, Bob just wasn't that kind of person. It wasn't somebody who was moody and depressed and troubled, and he never came to me with his problems. He was always he was always a joyful playmate, and he loved his dog, and he, he had a dear wife. Now I understand, and he was happily married, and how's it possible that this could have happened? And so that's the trigger for the first book.
Oh, and is this preacher finds a corpse?
Preacher finds a corpse.
Yes, I
And
was getting ready to ask you for a synopsis, but this is you're telling me then how this. Oh my God, how interesting! He goes out hunting with some friends, and he finds one of his other friends, Bob. How long was Bob? Had he recently been shot? When
was
when
it that? Yeah, it was that morning. I mean, it was a fresh
oh
corpse, and so one of the people in town that Evan has met at the local cafe, which I renamed the Come On In, the place where he has his pancakes in the morning. He's met the local sheriff, who's a very troubled, overweight African American fellow who, there aren't many of his church fellows in that community. Let's put it that way.
hmm
So he's having trouble keeping his job, and he just he just wants things to kind of stay on an even keel.
hmm
And so Sheriff Chet Otis is more about this. If it looks like suicide, if it walks like suicide, if it smells like a suicide, come on, Evan. I'm not going to pry into this.
hmm
Okay. And so it falls to Evan to drill into what the motivations might be. And this isn't a spoiler because he finds the corpse on the first page.
hmm
So this idea of and one of the as an author, one of the things that I is kind of wonderful about writing about amateur sleuths is that I don't know police procedure. I never
hmm
studied criminology, okay, and neither did Evan. He's
hmm
got a logical mind. He's got, he knows how to use, online tools, and so do I. So uh, we're on the same path, if you will. And I won't say I'm an I don't knowist from the standpoint of religion. I still feel as though I've got a core of I draw a distinction between belief and faith. I mean, if you're among people who say if you don't believe X, Y, and Z, you're not one of us. Those kind of really might not be my peeps. I can certainly sympathize with where they're coming from, but the idea of I see somebody on the street and they kind of smile and give me a look, and I go, "Hi, hi, sister." It's just faith is not something you can explain.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's something you shouldn't necessarily try to explain because that's why it's faith. Okay,
Right. Right.
otherwise it's like facts,
Yeah.
and we both know that finding facts is getting, I've seen some stuff in my Facebook feed, which I still, believe it or not, look at. And somehow I got plugged into an ancient archaeology feed. And, you wouldn't believe the faked up pictures, the
Oh
fake
yeah. Yeah.
imagery.
Yeah.
Here's some bunch of people, and it shows them digging out a human skull that is 15 foot high.
Oh my God.
And
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, darn,
Yeah.
look at that.
Yeah.
And it's so real, and yet, you know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
have a hunch that's not, not
Not
the real
yeah.
deal.
Not you.
And now I'm seeing all these posts about the stuff that's deep underneath the pyramids, all these the structures that somehow by sonar, I guess it is, or whatever they have found, and it may or may not be true, but there's just,
Yeah.
I'm not plugged into those research databases enough to know, and there's so much of that kind of stuff out there. Which rabbit do you want to chase?
Yeah. Yeah. This is true. This is true. So for Preacher Finds a Corpse, what period is this story set in, and why did you choose this specific time period to set Preacher Finds a Corpse?
Well, it would be contemporary in that there's 4 books and they are somewhat chronological. You don't have to read them in sequence. At least I try to give you enough backstory on it. Let's say if I'm reintroducing a character, I'll find some, I hope, subtle way of working who they are and what they do into it. So Evan does mature. I'd say the span of the books might be 10 years. I think now by the time we get to the new one,
Hmm.
it'll definitely be present day, because we've got some stuff going on that's very much in the headlines, if you will.
Okay.
The one right before this is Preacher Stalls the Second Coming, which actually I learned that there really was a CIA plot back in the 1960s to fake the second coming of Christ.
Wow.
So that, I mean, this is back, the other way of destroying this was to destroy Castro, to bring him down. The other way to do that was the exploding cigar. So both of these ideas were about the same
Oh my God.
credibility, but they were going to park a submarine off the coast of Cuba and shoot off all this weaponry, and then have some voice in a bullhorn tell the faithful of Castro that Fidel was the Antichrist and he had to be overthrown. The plot never was used, as far as anybody knows. It did come out in testimony before Congress, the Frank Church Committee, but it was just one of those kind of dumb ideas that got stuck in a file drawer. But there is a conspiracy theory these days called Project Bluebeam, which accuses NASA of working on advanced technology for a virtual reality global return of Christ.
Mm.
And that's becoming more and more technically feasible. I do feel as though that also is fantasy, because I would submit that Christ returned almost immediately after he was here. It's called the Holy Spirit. If you don't know it's here, you missed it. But
Mm-hmm.
it's there. You can find it. It's
Interesting.
not a mystery to anybody who knows it. So I don't really, it's like thief in the night. That's the true part. Coming in the clouds. No, no. That's what that was like, to distract the other people who don't know. Anyhow, Preacher Stalls the Second Coming is about a Jim Jones character. It's like embarrassing to use the name, but an unscrupulous evangelist who lures people to his farm, especially homeless folks and hungry people who are, they're not only looking for some hope, they're also looking for a meal. And the thing is, once you get into the farm and sign the papers and give away your possessions and whatever, you ain't getting out. And so this becomes, in effect, a religious concentration camp. And
Oh.
that's a fictional story. At least my version of it is, it has happened in other places of the world, and actually relatively recently. But that's what that book is about. So yeah, yes, because a lot of that had to do with misinformation, fake information. They're when they finally find out about this guy, they're digging bodies out of the ground, and it's kind of like these news images you see from Gaza, where you see all these white body bags on the ground, and so then there's these rumors that after the camera shuts off, that the people who are in the body bags just unzip them and get out, and this has just been completely fake news. Well, that's kind of what's going on in the book here, is that this pastor, actually, this unscrupulous pastor, is claiming that it never happened. It just never happened. It's all
Mm.
been. It's like the Holocaust. Or, what people say about the Holocaust never
Yeah.
happened. Never happened. So yes, it's very current from that standpoint.
Okay.
The series is very much in the news, if you will.
And so that's the third or fourth. So when we go back to the preacher finds the corpse. Evan's first time he's starting to do this some investigative detective work because the sheriff just wants it to kind of quietly go away. What's happening at the start of book two in the series? Preacher fakes a miracle, and is it connected? Are each of these books connected? So he finds this corpse. Who's his friend Bob? Is this Does it still show up in Preacher Fakes a Miracle, or is each book kind of a standalone book?
Well, they're definitely not standalone, but you could read them standalone, as I say, because I'm and that's true of a lot of fiction series. Is you don't necessarily have to be a fan of the series to jump in. And Preacher Fakes a Miracle is the second one in the series. Yes, there are characters and plot threads that continue. And in Preacher Finds a Corpse, one of the unscrupulous characters is a local investment banker.
Mm.
And the idea of land grab and corruption and, being involved with government officials who are somewhat on the take, that's all part of that story. And as much dirt as Evan finds, there's always more to. It is kind of a bottomless hole. In Preacher Fakes a Miracle, at the local uh, children's home, which is being run by a Catholic charity, there are young women who get outplaced into jobs, into menial jobs like seamstress or um, hotel attendant, whatever. And there is in the Lake of the Ozarks there is now a rather thriving casino culture, and so some of these women end up going to work as housekeepers at the casino. And Evan finds that some of these women simply disappear.
Mm.
Some of them seem to have been abused, but they the court system seems to shove them over into mental health facilities, not necessarily into prison because they haven't necessarily done anything wrong,
Hmm.
but maybe they're being stoked up on Haldol or Thorazine or something to keep them quiet. So teen abduction is very much a part of the second book. So it's a bit grittier from that standpoint.
Okay.
Uh, and yet, it turns out that one of the young people that Evan meets in this mental facility is a young man who has schizophrenia and
Mm.
believes he hears voices. And this kid's been completely written off. And it turns out he's actually the son of this unscrupulous banker who really doesn't want anybody to know that,
Oh.
that's his child.
Mm.
And doesn't understand him. He just parked him over here. You take care of him. I've got things to do. And so Evan's about the only person on earth who thinks that these voices might be telling this child something.
Ah.
Because I mean, I
How interesting.
wrote a book. I co-wrote a book with Rebecca Shaper called "The Light in His Soul: Lessons from My Brother's Schizophrenia."
Mm.
And I had a stepson who was also schizophrenic, so I'm very familiar with this area. And Rebecca believes that, I mean, her brother came back to the family after he was missing for 20 years,
Mm.
and she took care of him She got him on public assistance. She got him on the right medications. She got him set up with an apartment, and he maintained. I mean, he never was, just another, member of the community, but he maintained. He did well, and when he finally died, he didn't die. He didn't die by suicide, as many troubled people do. He simply died of lung cancer because he was a chain smoker. And so after he died, she was certain that he was her spirit guide, or is her spirit guide. And she believes that he shows up to her when she sees hummingbirds, and Rebecca's not. Rebecca's a very grounded person. So I mean, this is not the ravings of somebody who's off the edge. And she's very much of a healer herself, and one of the people that I hold dear. And that was a book that just kind of happened. That floated in like a hummingbird, as you will.
Okay.
That is one of the things I do. I do coach other authors, and I do play their editor, because, especially in the world of self-publishing, indie publishing, if you will, in the self-publishing, you have to learn how to become an indie publisher. You have to learn how to act like a publisher, and that is a very specific profession. And if as a self-published author you don't hire someone who is an editor who's had experience like me, you're never going to have the experience that I had dealing with those clowns at the publishers. I had these guys that would redline my manuscripts and yell at me and say, how come you missed that deadline? And but I mean, though, that was a learning experience. Now I try not to abuse my people. I can respect where they're coming from. I try to be more of a diplomat with and often it's just downright cheerleading. I mean, it's like, why didn't you turn in that next chapter? You were on a roll there. That's great. And so, my dog got sick. So.
Yeah. So before we go, I do want to talk about some some other things that you've done, like your travels and your not. But before we do, I wanted to close out the Evan Wycliff series. Can you tell us how many years have passed between Preacher Fakes a Miracle, where he's seeing these women who've been sent off, and this child has schizophrenia, his father in the financial industry is shady. How many years between that, what happens to Evan in that story, before the launch of Preacher Raises the Dead?
Preacher Raises the Dead, and then the one after that is, as I said, Preacher Stole the Second Coming. That it's several years. I mean, the entire span of the series is about 10 years. And Preacher Raises the Dead, what happens is that's a very specific time, because that's at the beginning of COVID. And at the beginning of COVID, Marcus Thurston, who's the old pastor of the Baptist Church in Appleton City, a fictional name, he is Evan's mentor. He's an African American with a heritage from Jamaica, but with a rather mysterious background.
Okay.
And also, like Chet Otis, they're the two most prominent Black people in town. It's like they're still not. It's not a really diverse community. Okay, and yet Marcus Thurston is a very dearly loved pastor, but the thing is that he wants to retire. And he tells Evan, there's this outbreak, and there's going to be a trying time, and it's time for me to just close the door to the parsonage, and and you've been guest preacher, and you're the people know you, and whatever, you're going to have to step up. Now, Evan never dreamed of being pastor of this church. It's a lot of work, and especially during COVID. You're going to stand by deathbeds. You're going to preside over funerals. You're going to officiate at weddings over Zoom. Okay, so Preacher Raises the Dead is all about that, because Evan's become married uh, to
Oh,
in a to a very, he's I won't say that he's
okay,
really
Evan.
recovered from Naomi, but he recognizes that um, he doesn't he shouldn't just necessarily dwell on that relationship, uh, even though in some ways she's still very alive for him. But he marries. Actually, it's the sister of the woman who got abducted. It's in the second book,
Interesting. Okay.
and so. But it's an unlikely marriage. But the thing that's interesting is she just throws herself into being a church lady. I mean, she just really wants to do the job, and it ends up being more pressure on her than Evan could have ever imagined. I mean, it's a lot of pressure on him, but he knows what's involved. She stepped into it somewhat blindly, and so this is causing a lot of trouble.
Mm,
And she's very good at what she's doing, but she's just plain working too hard. And
mm.
so, Preacher Raises the Dead is, you know, to dodge the spoiler a bit, is she ends up hospitalized, and the title refers to the fact that
Ah, okay.
that he's really praying that
Okay.
she'll wake back up.
Oh,
And
okay.
so this really strikes to the core of what does he believe? I mean, does he believe prayer is going to do any good? And he's kind of come to thought that you know you have what you want even before you ask it. The purpose of prayer to convince yourself that you have it. I mean, how could God be ever be withholding what it is that you need?
Hmm.
You know, and yet how could this horrible thing have happened? Because we were trying so hard to do things right.
Mm,
So why did I mean it's the old question, and you'd say this in every one of the books: is why do bad things happen to good people?
mm.
And um, that was the uh, there have been some very famous evangelists who preached endlessly on that theme.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was about 10 years, I'd say, and then the new one I'm calling Preacher Faces the Music, and he ends up going to Nashville, where my
Okay.
where my brother lives. My brother and his wife are docents at the Country Music Hall of Fame. So
Okay.
I got to know a lot about. I mean, I won't say country music was my prime favorite genre, but I certainly um, Willie Nelson uh, Allison Krauss, and I mean I'm I'm not unfamiliar with especially Roy Orbison. There's a lot of these. I guess you'd call them oldies, but I'm it's definitely part of my. And actually, in the books, I made Evan a Roy Orbison fan. Uh,
Okay.
so and he gets into. There's a YouTube of Black and White Nights, which is Orbison's amazing concert at the Ambassador Hotel, and he has on stage all of these other celebrities who just think he's God. And one of the ironies of it is the co-lead guitar with him is Springsteen, and yet this is a version of Springsteen that people just don't remember. He was in a silk suit, string tie, Tony Lama boots, his hair his hair all meticulously combed. This guy looked like a Las Vegas high roller.
Okay.
This is before the denim suit, right?
Yeah.
This is before the curly hair. It's before his voice dropped an octave. Okay, so and yet on the guitar, oh my God, there was just
Mm.
nobody better. Well, Orbison's probably better.
Okay. Oh, oh my. So you incorporate all these into your stories. When you started out the way you started, you said you did the door to door looking for a job. As we start to wrap up today's show, you did nonfiction writing at the start. So I wanted to ask you two closing questions. Which number one, which is easier for you? Have you found to sell generate income from, fiction or nonfiction? And why do you think this is?
Well, nonfiction certainly, and the fact is just simply that when I work as a professional writer and not just as a writer of nonfiction books, I mean, I have a book, How to Lie with Charts, which has been taught at Georgetown and Empire State as a textbook, and it's about it's about graphic design. It's about what you'd call data visualization, and it's something of a classic text. And I wrote that years ago, but I worked in computer graphics, designing business presentations, basically what would be called PowerPoint today. And so I know that world quite well. And I also know how, charts and graphs can be deliberately made misleading or accidentally made misleading. So that's what that book is about. But I will say that as a professional writer, I have made more money as a supporter of large-scale business proposals
Okay.
on teams for, say, government contracts.
Okay.
So I have worked in aerospace, I've worked in healthcare IT, I've worked in government staffing, and I did quite a bit of work for USAID before it disappeared. And it's very stimulating from the standpoint that, and it's been very, especially through the COVID period, even before that, those teams worked very much on Zoom, and then now they're Microsoft Teams, and it's very collegial. I mean, you might have 20 or 30 people on that team, and depending upon what the topic is of the day, there might be only half a dozen. But you've got these subject areas, subject matters that you are working in, because these proposals are very complex. They're like thick as a telephone book. And the federal acquisitions regulations are extremely complex. And so this is kind of like being a CPA and understanding the IRS code. You can't just walk into that world and say, well, I'm a writer, I'll help you. So that's why you, quote unquote, get paid the big bucks in that world. But the problem is, especially in recent times, that world has frozen over. And that's not that government contracts will go away, and these are sometimes multi-billion-dollar contracts. Mm-hmm. The problem with that profession as a proposal writer, editor, manager, is that you could be working for a Fortune 500 aerospace company. They're working on a contract that they either already hold that they need to recompete for, or they're working against their biggest competitor. But they've been working on this particular contract for the last 2 or 3 years at least, and they've already got a team of 30 to 100 people assigned and supporting it. So they're spending some major money on putting this together. The problem is that these days, they don't know who their point of contact is. They don't know who the person inside of the government. Yes, they know the acquisitions officer, or they know the person who's the manager of this particular IT department or whatever. And they know that person, and they know that agency, and they know that mission, and they know in some ways they know what those agencies want before they know what they want. And that's a mark of a good proposal, is that we're thinking ahead. We're trying to do your thinking for you. And, we're not telling you what to do, but, we're trying to convince you this would be a good idea, because you need to think beyond next week. Mm-hmm. You need to think, 10 years from now, especially, you're talking about defense systems, for example. So, but again, you may have those close ties. These are your colleagues. These are the people in the government that are your customers, your client. And guess what? You try to get them on the phone. Oh, they don't work here anymore.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how that situation resolves itself. I think the philosophy is, let's just break it and see how it grows back. Because, it would grow back, but, maybe on a smaller scale or whatever. But I did a presentation to the Association of Proposal Management Professionals, is how to get past the newbie evaluator.
Mm.
And my point was, these are going to be inexperienced people. They're not going to know the federal acquisition regulations. They're, they're, they're not necessarily going to know anything about the subject you're writing to. They're going to have a checklist. You know,
Yeah.
did they answer this? Did they answer this? Did they answer
Yeah.
this? Now you get to the second or third round of evaluation, and yeah, you might get a scientist looking at your stuff. But
Mm.
it's a fascinating world because actually, Denise, I end up learning so much about various subject areas that I can you know none of my books hold anything like what you'd call secrets because actually I'm not authorized to work in the secret world.
Mhm.
So, don't worry.
Okay.
but but it does, I mean, especially things like large scale computer systems, large scale enterprise computer systems like the government has, like, data collection systems and surveillance and espionage and cybercrime. I mean, this is stuff that areas that I not only read about, but it's areas that I worked in. So that gives a kind of authenticity, I hope, to some of the things that I write about. Well, for example, I mean, Preacher Stalls the Second Coming. The scientist who stumbles into Evan's little trailer because he's moved out of the house, um, living like a hermit. The fellow stumbles into his trailer is this physicist who's warning about this project Bluebeam and virtual reality, and he says, Evan, you can't believe anything you see anymore, and and in some ways, not even what you see. I won't say not even what you see on the street, although that day is coming too. So,
Mm. We're all so enjoyed having you on here today, Gerald. We've had the privilege to our listeners having Gerald Everett Jones on this Off the Shelf this morning. Please tell Off the Shelf listeners where they can get a copy of your books.
well, I'm on Amazon, and I'm also on Barnes and Noble, Kobo, all those other book distributors worldwide. GeraldEverettJones.com, as you mentioned, it would be a great place to go and find out about my entire book list, all 14 novels and some 5 nonfiction. The Searching for Jonah that I co-wrote with it's my father's book, and I I edited it for him right before he passed away, and it's a fascinating book about the real, the archaeology and the ancient history of the book of Jonah. So,
Oh my
Gerald,
goodness. So we have, again, just what a pleasure and so much, just a wealth of experience in your own life. And then it always finds its way into our writings of our experiences, do. So thank you for all you shared. And then for those who want to know more, Gerald, what we explored on today's show was the Evan Wycliff book series. Then again, as he said, How to Lie with Charts, Harry Harambe's Kenyan Sundowner, Clifford Spiral's Searching for Jonah, which Gerald just mentioned, Clues in Hebrew and Assyrian History. This was a book that he co-wrote with his father, Don Jones, and what a blessing to get that book out as well. And we didn't have time to explore those other books here on the show today, but thank you so much, Gerald, for being here with us. Just such a creative screenwriter, book reviewer, radio host. He's just done so many things and has worked with people who are quite accomplished. So it's a pleasure to have you on here. And again, I encourage you to visit Gerald online at GeraldEverettJones.com, GeraldEverettJones.com. Please go and support him. And that Evan Wycliff book series sounds so interesting. So he's working on a new book in the series. You can keep up with all of his recent books. And if you came in midstream after the show finishes streaming and it's released, you can listen to it as many times as you like. And it's something, even if you've read a book in a series, listening to the author talk about the story might give you some insight into even some motivations behind the character, Evan Wycliff, who sounds like such an interesting character. So thank you again for being here with us on Off the Shelf, Gerald. When the show finishes streaming, I will send you a link to the show. And as I always tell you, our listeners, you are awesome. You are incredible. Please go out and create a fabulous day for yourself. See you back here next Saturday on Off the Shelf. Tell book lovers everywhere. Tune in to Off the Shelf Books. You don't want to miss it. Thank you. Thank